The thing that mimics bird calls. As a biologist, I've spent my life studying patterns. The migration of birds, the bloom of a flower, the precise mathematical spiral of a seashell. There's a comfort in it, a deep sense of order. You learn to believe that everything in nature, no matter how chaotic it seems, follows a set of rules. But I'm recording this to tell you that I was wrong. I'm here to tell you that the most terrifying thing in the world isn't a lack of patterns. It's a pattern that is almost perfect, but fundamentally, impossibly wrong. I specialized in avian acoustics, birdsong. To me, it was the planet's most beautiful language. Every trill, every chirp, every complex melody is a signature, a declaration of life that has been refined over millions of years. I could identify a species from a single note, half heard from 100 yards away. I thought I knew every song the forest had to sing. This recording is my warning. If you are a person who loves the quiet places, who finds peace in the sounds of the natural world, you need to listen. Be careful of the sounds you hear at dawn. Be careful of the melodies that drift out of the deep woods. And most of all, be careful of any song that sounds too beautiful to be real. My partner Chloe and I went into the Appalachian wilderness looking for a rare species of warbler. On our first morning, we heard a sound that brought tears to my eyes. We thought we had discovered a miracle. What we had really done was answer a call. It began, as these things so often do, with a sense of perfect, idyllic peace. The research cabin was a speck on the map, a tiny, forgotten outpost nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. It took us 6 hours of driving from the nearest city, followed by a 2-hour hike along a barely there trail to reach it. By the time we arrived, the world we had left behind felt like a distant dream. There was no cell service, no hum of traffic, no sign of human life for at least 50 miles in any direction. There was only the vast, ancient forest and the profound, beautiful silence. The cabin itself was rustic and charming, built from dark, fragrant cedar wood, with a wide porch that overlooked a small, crystal-clear stream. This was to be our home and our laboratory for the next 2 weeks. For me, it was paradise. For Chloe, my partner, it was inspiration. We had a familiar, comfortable routine. The moment we dropped our packs on the porch, our different ways of seeing the world became immediately apparent. My first priority was the equipment. I carefully unpacked my gear. A high-sensitivity parabolic microphone that looked like a clear satellite dish, a multi-channel digital recorder, and my laptop, loaded with the spectrogram software that would turn the forest sounds into visible, measurable data. This was the first seed, the tool I believed would help me understand this place. I was a man of science, and this equipment represented my connection to logic, to reason, to the quantifiable truth of the world. Chloe, on the other hand, barely glanced at my tangle of wires and electronics. She had already pulled out her sketchbook and a stick of charcoal, her eyes scanning the canopy of the ancient trees, the way the light filtered through the leaves. She was an artist. Her job was to capture the soul of the forest, while mine was to capture its voice. She saw the world in shapes and shadows. I saw it in frequencies and wavelengths. The simmering tension between my scientific focus and her artistic intuition was part of our dynamic. "Can you hear that, Liam?" she whispered, her hand already moving across the page in a series of swift, confident strokes. I paused, listening. "Hear what?" "I don't hear anything," She smiled, not looking up from her drawing. Exactly. The silence. It's so loud. It feels ancient. The bioacoustics are incredible, I agreed, adjusting the tripod for my microphone. The lack of human-made noise means the soundscape here is pristine. I should be able to get the cleanest recordings of my career. She looked at me then, her smile warm. You see, Data, I see a painting waiting to happen. That was us. 2 different languages to describe the same beautiful thing. We spent that first afternoon setting up our small camp, full of hope and the quiet excitement that comes with being exactly where you are supposed to be. The forest felt welcoming, a peaceful sanctuary that promised incredible discoveries. We had no idea that it had been waiting for us, and that our arrival had just broken a very long and patient silence. Our first morning began with the dawn chorus, and it was everything I had hoped for. As the first pale light of day filtered through the trees, the forest erupted in a symphony of sound. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes closed, just listening. I could pick out each individual voice, the flute-like call of a wood thrush, the cheerful chatter of a Carolina wren, the distant, percussive drumming of a woodpecker. It was a complex, beautiful, and perfectly natural orchestra. It was the sound of a healthy, thriving ecosystem. I was just about to get up and start the day's recordings when a new sound cut through the chorus. It was a birdsong, but it was unlike anything I had ever heard in my life. It was impossibly complex, a cascading series of notes that seemed to weave together the melodies of a dozen different species into a single, breathtaking performance. It had the lyrical, haunting quality of a hermit thrush, the rapid-fire trill of a winter wren, and a range that surpassed even a mockingbird. The song rose and fell, a perfect, intricate piece of music that seemed to fill the entire valley. This was the second seed, the beautiful, impossible melody that would lead to our undoing. I shot upright, my heart pounding with a sudden, intense jolt of adrenaline. Every professional instinct in my body screamed at once. That was not a sound that existed in any textbook, any database, any recording I had ever studied. Chloe, did you hear that? I whispered, already scrambling for my recording equipment. She was already awake, sitting by the window, a look of awe on her face. It's beautiful, she breathed. What is it? I have no idea, I said, my hands trembling with excitement as I aimed the parabolic microphone toward the window. It's new. The word felt electric on my tongue. New. It's the one word every biologist, every explorer dreams of. A new species, a new discovery, a chance to write your own small line in the history of science. I hit the record button, my entire being focused on capturing this impossible, perfect sound. The song continued for a full 5 minutes, a flawless, looping melody, before it faded as gently as it had begun. I sat back, a wide, triumphant grin on my face. I got it, I said, feeling a sense of elation I hadn't felt in years. I got a perfect, clean recording. Chloe was still staring out the window, her expression having shifted from awe to something else, something I couldn't quite read. It's beautiful, she said again, but this time her voice was different, quieter, almost too beautiful. I looked at her, my excitement faltering for a second. What do you mean, too beautiful? I don't know, she said, shaking her head slightly. It didn't sound wild. It sounded composed. Perfect. Every note was exactly where it should be. Nature isn't usually that neat. I laughed, the sound a little too loud in the quiet cabin. That's what makes it an incredible discovery, I said, already plugging the recorder into my laptop. Don't worry, I'll analyze the spectrogram and I'll figure it out. I dismissed her unease as the fanciful thought of an artist. In my scientific mind, I was already drafting the paper I would write, already thinking of the name I would give this new, incredible species. I was completely, utterly blind to the subtle warning her intuition had just given me. Later that day, still riding the high of my discovery, I convinced Chloe to go for a hike. My official reason was to survey the territory, to see if I could catch a glimpse of our mysterious singer. But the truth is, I was restless, filled with an electric energy that made the small cabin feel like a cage. Chloe agreed, grabbing her sketchbook, though I noticed the thoughtful, unsettled expression from the morning hadn't entirely left her face. We walked for over an hour, following the winding path of the stream deeper into the forest. The further we went, the quieter the woods became. It was a subtle shift, one I might not have noticed if I weren't an acoustician. The constant ambient chatter of the smaller birds began to fade. The buzzing of insects seemed to die down, until all we could hear was the rustle of our own footsteps on the fallen leaves. It was Chloe who saw them first. She stopped, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Liam, look," she whispered, pointing towards a dense grove of hemlock trees just off the path. I followed her gaze, and I saw a bird's nest, tucked into the low branches of a tree. Then I saw another, and another. There were at least half a dozen of them, all clustered in this one small, strangely silent area. We stepped off the path and moved closer, a shared, unspoken curiosity pulling us forward. That's when the deep, gnawing unease began. This was the first true omen, a quiet glitch in the laws of nature. They were nests from several different species, a cup-shaped nest from a wood thrush, a smaller, more tightly woven one from a finch, another from a sparrow. Each one was perfectly constructed, a masterpiece of natural engineering. And inside each and every nest, nestled in the soft lining, were eggs. Some were a pale, perfect blue. Others were a creamy white with brown speckles. This strange, unsettling location was the third seed. But they were all cold to the touch. Stone cold. "They've been abandoned," Chloe said softly, her voice filled with a sad reverence. "No," I replied, my scientific mind racing, trying to process the scene. "No, that's not right." I knelt down, examining the ground around the trees. If a nest is abandoned, it weathers. It starts to fall apart. These are pristine. And if a predator had gotten to them, a snake, a raccoon, a jay, there would be signs. Broken shells, tracks, something. There's nothing here. Absolutely nothing. I stood up, a feeling of cold dread beginning to push aside my scientific curiosity. The scene was a complete violation of every natural law I knew. It was a small, avian graveyard, where the victims had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only these silent, perfect monuments to their existence. It was as if the parent birds, in the middle of the most primal act of their lives, had simply ceased to be. Chloe wouldn't get any closer. She stood at the edge of the grove, a look of profound horror on her face. "This place isn't right, Liam," she said. "This is a sad place." I took a few photos from my log, my hands feeling heavy and slow. I tried to see it as a puzzle, an unexplained environmental phenomenon. But Chloe was right. It wasn't a puzzle. It was a warning. And as we backed away from the silent nests and the unhatched eggs, the beautiful, impossible birdsong we had heard that morning took on a new, much more sinister tone in my memory. The following day, a tense, unspoken quiet settled over the cabin. We both tried to act as though nothing was wrong, but the memory of the silent nests and the strange, flawed melody hung between us like a shroud. I couldn't focus on my work. The scientific puzzle that had initially excited me now felt like a threat. The logical explanations I had forced myself to believe felt thin and hollow. Unable to sit still, I decided to do a thorough search of the cabin. Previous researchers often left notes, logs, or forgotten equipment. I was looking for anything that could shed some light on the anomalies we had witnessed. It was in the bottom drawer of a small, dusty desk, a drawer that was stuck and had to be pried open with my knife that I found it. It was a simple, leather-bound field journal, its pages warped and stiff from years of damp. I opened it carefully. On the inside cover, written in a neat academic script, was a name and a date. Dr. Alistair Finch, spring season, 15 years ago. This was our guide, a voice from the past left behind in this lonely place. I sat down and began to read. The early entries filled me with a strange mix of excitement and dread. Finch's experience was a perfect mirror of my own. His first few pages were filled with a breathless, scientific wonder. The 12th of April, he had written, "Arrival. The biodiversity in this region is simply astounding. The isolation provides a pristine acoustic environment. This is a researcher's dream." I felt a kinship with the man, a shared sense of purpose across the years. I turned the page. The 14th of April. Dawn. I have heard it. A birdsong of impossible complexity. It is unlike any documented species in North America. The melody is intricate, sustained, and almost mathematically perfect. The trills are reminiscent of a wren, but the tonal range is far greater. Could it be a new species? A subspecies of mimic thrush with a vastly expanded repertoire? The discovery of a lifetime is at hand. I have made several clean recordings. My blood ran cold. He had heard it too. He had recorded it. I was not the first. I frantically read on, the neat script a testament to a scientific mind that was, just like mine, trying to categorize the impossible. He wrote for days about his attempts to spot the bird, his frustration at its elusiveness, and his sheer, unadulterated awe at its song. He was a man on the brink of a great discovery, and I was following in his exact footsteps, 15 years too late. I continued to read, my sense of connection to Dr. Finch growing with every page. He was a kindred spirit, a man of science chasing an incredible mystery. But as I turned deeper into the journal, I noticed a change. The entries, once recorded daily, became more sporadic. The neat academic script began to fray at the edges, becoming looser, more hurried. The scientific observations started to be interspersed with more personal, unsettled thoughts. The journal was becoming the rambling, cautionary story of the guide. The 22nd of April, he wrote, a remarkable development. The song has changed. It has incorporated a new phrase, a 3-note sequence that is identical to the squeak of the cabin's front door. I must be mistaken. It's a coincidence, an auditory illusion, and yet I have heard it 3 times now. It feels intentional. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. The journal was no longer a comforting parallel to my own experience. It was a dark and terrifying omen. I read on as Finch's scientific curiosity slowly curdled into a palpable paranoia. The 25th of April. The other birds have gone silent. The dawn chorus is gone. There is only the woods and its song. It's begun mimicking my whistling. I was humming a tune while making coffee yesterday, and this morning I heard it woven into the main melody. It is listening, it is learning. The final entries were written in a frantic scrawl, the handwriting barely legible, the ink smudged and blotted. He wrote of a profound and suffocating loneliness, of a feeling of being watched by an unseen, intelligent predator. He wrote of the same silent, abandoned nests we had found. Then I turned to the last page. There was only one entry, a few short, sharp sentences that looked like they had been clawed into the paper. May 3rd. It's not a bird. It uses their songs. It's calling for me. I have to see it. That was the end. The rest of the journal was empty. I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. The journal wasn't a log of a great discovery. It was a record of a man's descent into madness and obsession. It was a guide, but not to a new species. It was a roadmap to a trap. And I realized with a sickening, horrifying clarity that I was standing at the very beginning of that same road. Dr. Alistair Finch had heard the beautiful song, and it had led him to his doom. And now, 15 years later, the song had started again. For us. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Chloe must have seen the look of absolute horror on my face, because she came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Liam? What is it? What did you find? I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Not yet. I couldn't give voice to the terrible story of Dr. Finch's descent into madness. I'm not sure, I lied, my voice strained. Just some unsettling observations. I need to check my data. I need to be sure. My earlier scientific excitement had curdled into a cold, methodical dread. Finch's journal was a terrifying hypothesis, and now I had to test it. I turned to my laptop, my one bastion of logic and reason in this place that was rapidly falling apart. My investigation had begun, my growing unease forcing me to look for the strange details I had previously dismissed. I opened the audio analysis software and loaded the pristine, beautiful recording of the song I had captured on our first morning. A spectrogram, for those who don't know, is a way to see sound. It translates an audio file into a visual image, showing the frequencies and patterns of a sound wave. To a trained eye, a bird's song on a spectrogram is as unique as a fingerprint. It has an organic flow, with slight, natural variations, and a single, complex, but unified signature. I pulled up the spectrogram for a normal wood thrush from my database. It was beautiful, a complex but unified pattern of rising and falling lines. Then, I opened the file for our mystery song, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a fingerprint. It was a ransom note assembled from the cut-up letters of a dozen different magazines. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a song. I could see it as clear as day, on the screen in front of me. The distinct, jagged signature of a robin's call, stitched seamlessly to the soft, curved pattern of a sparrow's trill, which then flowed unnaturally into the sharp, staccato signature of a finch's chirp. It was a dozen different songs, a dozen different birds, all cut apart and pasted together with a digital, surgical precision that no living creature could ever replicate. And the glitch I had heard before? The faint, metallic undertone? On the spectrogram, it was a perfectly straight, thin, unwavering line that ran through the entire recording, a carrier wave of pure, synthetic frequency. It was the thread that stitched the pieces of the other songs together. I stared at the screen until the patterns on the spectrogram burned themselves onto the back of my eyelids. It was undeniable. It was impossible. It was the truth. My science, the one thing I had always trusted, had just provided me with perfect, irrefutable evidence of the supernatural. Chloe must have sensed the change in the room, the way the air had become thick and cold. She came to stand behind me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "What is it?" she asked softly. "What did you find?" I didn't know how to say it. How do you tell someone you love that a beautiful song is actually a monster? I simply pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Look," I said, my voice hoarse. "This jagged part here, that's the acoustic signature of a robin. This smooth, curved part is a sparrow. And this one, this sharp staccato section, is a finch." I zoomed out, showing her the entire monstrous composition. "It's not one song, Chloe. It's a collage. It's a dozen different birds, their voices stolen and stitched together with a precision that isn't natural." She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes tracing the unnatural patterns on the reason, the screen. She wasn't shocked. Her face held a look of quiet, sad validation. "I told you it was too perfect," she whispered. "It wasn't singing, it was quoting." Her choice of word sent a shiver down my spine. Quoting. It implied an intelligence, a librarian of stolen sounds. And as we stood there in the quiet cabin, the full, horrifying implication of what we were dealing with began to dawn on us. My mind flashed back to the final words in Dr. Finch's journal. "It's calling for me." It had learned the bird songs. Then it had learned the creak of a door and the sound of Finch's whistling. It was a mimic. It was a predator that learned the language of its prey in order to create the perfect lure. And now, it was here, with us. I looked at Chloe, and she looked at me, our shared terror reflected in each other's eyes. The cabin no longer felt like a research station. It felt like a glass cage. We were the new species in this territory, and this thing, this silent, patient predator, was outside, listening. It wasn't just hunting, it was studying. It was learning our sounds, waiting to create a new, perfect song just for us. Night fell, but sleep was an impossible luxury. We didn't even try. We extinguished the main lantern, leaving only a single, small lamp burning in the corner, casting long, fearful shadows across the room. We sat in the dark, side by side, on the small sofa, listening. The forest outside remained unnervingly silent, a complete absence of the normal nocturnal chorus. It was as if every living creature for miles around was holding its breath, waiting. We were waiting too. We knew it would come back. The silence stretched for hours, each creak of the old cabin's wood making us jump, each gust of wind sounding like a whisper. The cabin, which had felt like a charming rustic sanctuary just yesterday, now felt like a fragile wooden box in the middle of a vast, hungry darkness. This was our shelter, the only thing separating us from the elder. Impossible thing in the woods, and its safety was beginning to feel like a lie. It was just after midnight when the song began again. It started from a distance, the same breathtakingly beautiful, impossibly complex birdsong from the morning. But this time, there was no wonder in hearing it. There was only a cold, sickening dread. We huddled closer together, listening as the melody drifted through the trees, a serene and deadly lullaby. And then it changed. Woven into the familiar tapestry of stolen birdsong was a new sound, one that had no place there. It was a rhythmic, scratching sound. Shk, shk, shk. My blood ran cold. It was the exact sound of Chloe's charcoal pencil being sharpened, a sound she had made for nearly an hour that afternoon while sitting on the porch. The entity had recorded it, and now it was playing it back to us, incorporating it into its song. Before we could even process the horror of that, another sound joined the symphony, a sharp, mechanical click. My camera shuddered. It was a perfect replica of the sound, used now as a percussive beat in the horrifying melody. But the final violation was the one that truly broke us. The birdsong and the captured sounds faded for a moment, and in their place, we heard our own voices, or rather, the ghosts of our voices. It was a phrase from our conversation that first morning, a perfect, toneless mimicry. "It's beautiful," Chloe's voice said, flat and emotionless. "I have no idea," my own voice replied, empty of all its earlier excitement. The words were not spoken with meaning or intent. They were just sounds, stolen and replayed, woven into the fabric of the monster's song. The entity had been listening to us all day. It had been learning. And now, it was composing a symphony of our own private moments. A personalized horror story told in a language of stolen sounds. The fragile sense of safety we felt had collapsed. The sound began to move. At first, it had been an ambient, omnipresent sound, coming from the woods all around us. But now, it started to localize. The song seemed to coalesce into a single point of origin, a point that was now in motion. It was patrolling. We could track its movement as it began a slow, deliberate circle around the cabin. The impossible birdsong, interwoven with the sound of my camera and Chloe's stolen words, would grow louder as it passed the window on the east wall, the glass vibrating almost imperceptibly with the sound. For a hopeful second, the sound faded as it moved to the back of the cabin, and I allowed myself to think it was passing by, that it was leaving. But then, it swelled again, louder this time, as it came around the west side. This wasn't a random path. This was a predator assessing its cage. Chloe buried her face in my shoulder, her body trembling uncontrollably. I wrapped my arms around her, my own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There was no scientific principle to explain this, no procedure in the handbook for what to do when a sound itself becomes the hunter. Then, the circling stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even worse than the music. For 10 agonizing seconds, there was nothing. My ears strained, searching for a sign of where it had gone. Was it retreating back into the woods? Was it just watching us from a new position? The not knowing was a unique and terrible form of torture. And then the song erupted again. It wasn't distant. It wasn't at the side of the cabin. It was a loud, sharp, perfectly clear melody coming from right outside our front door. In that moment, the last of our perceived safety shattered completely. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a cage. The thin wooden door, our only barrier against the impossible thing in the night, now felt as useless as a sheet of paper. The beautiful natural phenomenon had revealed its true nature. It was a close, intelligent, and predatory threat. The song played on for another minute, a cheerful, childish tune, twisted into a promise of absolute malice, drilling into our skulls from just a few feet away. We were cornered, trapped. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the music stopped. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. We stared at the door, too terrified to even breathe. And then we heard a new sound. A soft, hesitant knock. Knock. Knock on the wooden door. It wasn't a frantic, animalistic scratching. It was a polite, intelligent, and perfectly human sound. A sound it must have learned from a memory. A sound it was now using to try and get in. The entity knew we were inside, and now it wanted to be invited. The soft, polite knocking on the door was somehow more terrifying than the monstrous symphony that had preceded it. A symphony is an act of nature, however twisted. A knock is an act of intelligence. It implies a hand, a mind, a desire to enter. We stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, staring at the old iron latch on the door, expecting it to turn. But after a minute of unbearable silence, there was nothing. The knock did not repeat. Slowly, carefully, we backed away from the door, retreating to the relative safety of the far corner of the cabin. The night was no longer just about a strange sound. It was about a presence, a thinking, patient predator that was now actively trying to get to us. The entity's assault was becoming more direct. Its illusions designed to attack our most fundamental weaknesses. After an hour of near total silence, a new sound began. It was different from the birdsong. It was faint, distant, and carried on the night wind. It was the unmistakable sound of a small child crying. It wasn't a loud wail, but a series of soft, heartbroken sobs that seemed to drift from the deep woods behind the cabin. Every rational part of my mind screamed that it was a trick. I knew, with an absolute certainty born of the terror from the last few hours, that it was the mimic. I knew it was another lure, another composition of stolen sounds designed to prey on us. But knowing it and hearing it are two very different things. The sound was so realistic, so filled with genuine pain and fear, that it bypassed all my logic and struck a deep, primal chord of empathy inside me. My body tensed, my instincts screaming at me to go outside, to find the source, to help the child. I looked at Chloe. Her face was pale, and tears were welling in her eyes. "That's not real, is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Liam, it can't be real, but it sounds so real." We held on to each other, fighting the instinct to be good, to be human. After several long, agonizing minutes, the sound of the crying child slowly faded away. We allowed ourselves a single, shuddering breath of relief. But it was only replaced by something worse. From a different direction now, from the path leading back to the trail, we heard another voice. It was a woman, and she was calling for help. Her voice was weak, strained, as if she were injured. "Help me," the voice drifted through the night. "Please, I'm lost. Is anyone there?" It was an auditory illusion beckoning us into the woods. It was a direct assault on our duty, on our compassion. To hear a person in distress and do nothing is a violation of everything we believe ourselves to be. The entity wasn't just trying to scare us with strange noises anymore. It was trying to break our spirit, to use our own humanity as a weapon against us. It was a test, a horrifying, impossible test. Sit here and do nothing while someone might be dying, or walk out that door and into the jaws of a monster that speaks with a human tongue. We stayed huddled in the dark, ignoring the phantom cries for help until they eventually faded away, leaving us in a tense, ringing silence. We had passed the test. We hadn't taken the bait, but there was no sense of victory, only a profound and chilling exhaustion. We had spent the night resisting our own humanity, and the effort had left us feeling hollowed out, as if we had lost a part of ourselves. We waited for the entity to try again, for the song to start, for a new, cruel mimicry to begin. But for a long time, there was nothing. Only the sound of our own breathing and the occasional creak of the cabin's old wood. It was in this quiet moment that I, as an acoustician, noticed the next, most terrifying change. At first, it was a subtle feeling, a sense of something missing. The sounds of the night, the ones that should have been there, were gone. I strained my ears, trying to catch the familiar, comforting chirp of crickets that had been a constant since our arrival. There were none. The rustle of small nocturnal animals in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl, all of it had vanished. "Chloe," I whispered, my voice tight. "Listen." She lifted her head, her eyes wide in the dim light. We listened together. The silence was no longer just an absence of the mimic's song, it was an absence of everything. The entire forest, for miles around us, had fallen completely and unnaturally silent. It was a dead, sterile quiet, as if we were inside a soundproofed room. The feeling was utterly suffocating. It was as if every living creature in the woods, from the smallest insect to the largest predator, knew that the true master of this forest was awake and hunting, and they had all fallen silent in a collective, primal act of terror. We were the only things left making a sound, our frantic heartbeats and ragged breaths, an obscene beacon in the dead quiet. The supernatural phenomena had escalated, making the fear real by silencing the entire world around us. And then, into that perfect, dead silence, the song began again. It was just the birdsong this time, the beautiful, impossible melody. But hearing it now, as the only sound in a dead forest, was 1,000 times more terrifying. It was no longer a part of the natural world. It was the world. The entity had silenced the entire orchestra so that its solo performance could begin, and we were its sole captive audience. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the cabin, listening to the lonely, terrible song in the dead, silent forest. It played for hours, a relentless, beautiful, and malevolent performance. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two things: the pristine, abandoned nests and the impossible, stitched together patterns on my spectrogram. My scientific mind, even in its state of absolute terror, was desperately trying to connect the pieces, to find a pattern in the madness. The song was a lure. My analysis had proven that. It was a perfect, irresistible bait for birds. The nests were a graveyard. Our own eyes had shown us that. A place of silent, inexplicable tragedy. I had been treating them as two separate mysteries, two different data points in this nightmare. It was only as the first faint gray light of dawn began to seep through the window that my exhausted brain finally slammed the two horrifying facts together. The truth of the place, the nature of the entity, began to reveal itself. "Chloe," I whispered, my voice a dry crackle. She looked at me, her face pale and drawn in the dim light. "The nests," I said. "I was wrong. They weren't abandoned." Her eyes widened, not understanding. I forced myself to say the words, to give voice to the terrible conclusion I had reached. We were looking for signs of a predator, raccoon tracks, snake scales, broken shells, but we were thinking of a normal predator, one that attacks the nest. I took a shaky breath. This thing, it's different. It's smarter. The full horrifying realization washed over me, and I felt a wave of nausea. It doesn't attack the nests, Chloe. It attacks the parents. It sings that song, that perfect, impossible song, and the birds, they just follow it. They hear a melody more beautiful than anything they've ever heard, and they fly towards it, leaving their eggs, their young, everything. They fly right into the arms of the thing that's singing to them. This was the payoff for the mystery of the silent nests. They weren't a sign of a strange disease or a localized event. They were the leftovers from a hunt. They were the empty homes of the entity's previous victims. The beautiful song wasn't a territorial call or a mating display. It was the sound of a trap being set. And just like those birds, we had heard the song, and we had been drawn into its territory. We weren't just being haunted. We were being actively, intelligently, and very patiently hunted. My horrifying conclusion about the nests hung in the silent cabin, a new layer of terror that settled over us. I was a scientist who had just understood the predatory nature of his subject, but the answer provided no comfort, only a deeper understanding of the grave danger we were in. Chloe stared at me, her face a mask of dawning horror as she processed my words. Her gaze drifted from me to the laptop screen, where the monstrous spectrogram of the song was still displayed. She looked at the stitched-together patterns of the different bird calls, her artist's eye seeing something that my scientific mind had missed. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Where does it get the songs?" I didn't understand the question at first. "It's a mimic, Chloe. A hyper-advanced one. It must listen, learn, and then replicate the sounds." She shook her head slowly, her eyes still locked on the screen. "No," she said. Look at the signatures. You said yourself, they're identical to the real birds. Perfect. Not almost perfect. Perfect." She turned to face me, and what I saw in her eyes was a terror so profound it made my own fear seem shallow. "It's not learning, Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not copying." And then she delivered the final, soul-shattering piece of the puzzle. A truth born not of data, but of pure, horrified intuition. "It's stealing to them." I stared at her, not wanting to understand, but my mind was already making the horrible connection. The pristine nests with no signs of a struggle. The parent birds that had simply vanished. The perfect, flawless replication of their songs. The truth revealed itself. A final, horrifying twist about the nature of the entity itself. It wasn't a ghost, but a mimic that absorbs the tragedies of those who come here and uses those tragedies as bait. It didn't just mimic its victims, it consumed them, and in doing so, it absorbed their very essence, their voices, their songs. The beautiful, impossible melody we had heard wasn't an imitation. It was a chorus of ghosts. We were listening to the actual voices of the birds it had killed, now repurposed as a weapon to find new prey. It wasn't a mimic. It was a collector. Chloe's eyes filled with tears as the final, terrible realization struck her. "Liam," she cried, her voice breaking. "Last night, it was using our sounds, the camera, the pencil." She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. It was using our voices, and I finally understood our fate. The entity wasn't just trying to lure us out of the cabin to kill us. It was studying us. It was learning us. It didn't want to just end our lives. It wanted to add us to its collection. It wanted to steal our voices and use them to sing its next beautiful, terrible song. The revelation that the creature collected the voices of its victims plunged us into a new depth of despair. We were no longer just being hunted. We were being cataloged. We spent the rest of the day in a state of paranoid silence, terrified to speak, to make any sound that the entity could learn and steal. We barricaded the door with a heavy wooden table and covered the windows with blankets, creating a dark, suffocating tomb for ourselves. We were trying to become invisible, to erase our own presence from the world. As night fell again, the forest remained dead silent. But we knew it was out there, waiting, listening. It was hours later, in the deepest part of the night, that it began its final, most cruel assault. The entity began to use its ultimate weapon against us. It began to use a familiar voice. It started from the direction of the stream. A voice, clear and bright, cut through the night. It was Chloe's voice. "Liam, you have to come see this. It's incredible." I froze, my entire body going rigid. I looked at Chloe, who was sitting across the small room from me, her face illuminated by the single flickering lamp. Her eyes were wide, with a terror so profound it mirrored my own. She slowly shook her head, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. The voice outside was a perfect replica of hers. It wasn't the flat, toneless mimicry from the night before. This was different. This voice was filled with genuine excitement and wonder. The exact same joyful tone she used when she discovered a rare wildflower or a perfectly composed landscape. The entity had manifested itself more clearly now, taking on a form designed to blend our fears with our affections. "Hurry." The voice of the false Chloe called out, "Closer now. The moonlight on the water. It's so beautiful. You're missing it." I stared at the real Chloe, sitting just 10 feet away from me, silent and terrified. And yet, I could hear her, clear as day, outside in the deadly waiting forest, her voice a perfect silver lure. My mind struggled to reconcile the two realities. I knew it was a trick. I knew it was the monster. But the sound was so perfect, so utterly convincing, that a small, traitorous part of my brain wanted to believe it, wanted to go to her, to share in the beauty she was describing. This was the entity's demand, a gentle, poisonous invitation for consumption. It was using my love for her, my trust in her voice, as the bait in its trap. And as the false Chloe continued to call my name, her voice filled with a beautiful stolen joy, I understood that we were no longer fighting a monster. We were fighting a memory. The voice of the false Chloe continued to call for me from the darkness, sweet and patient, a perfect imitation of her joy. I stayed where I was, my arm wrapped tightly around the real Chloe, who was shaking beside me. Her eyes were locked on mine, wide with a terror that mirrored my own. We didn't need to speak. We both understood. The most beautiful sound in the world to me, the sound of her voice, had been turned into the call of a monster. After a few minutes, the entity seemed to realize that its first lure had failed. The sweet beckoning calls for me to come outside slowly faded away, and the oppressive dead silence of the forest returned. We remained frozen, listening, our ears straining for the slightest sound. And then, it changed its tactic. A new voice started, this time from the opposite side of the cabin, near the dense woods at the back. It was my voice. Chloe, my own voice cried out from the darkness, and it was a perfect, flawless replica. But it wasn't my voice of calm or reason. It was my voice filled with a sudden, sharp pain. Chloe, help! I think I twisted my ankle. Ah, God, it hurts! I need help! I felt Chloe flinch beside me, as if she'd been electrocuted. I tightened my grip on her arm, and she looked from my face to the back wall of the cabin, her expression a mixture of terror and confusion. I was sitting right there next to her, yet she could hear me outside, crying out in pain. The voice continued, more desperate now. Chloe, please, I can't put any weight on it. I need you. This was its true demand, its ultimate ultimatum. It had failed to lure me out with her voice, so now it was trying to lure her out with mine. It was a strategy of pure, psychological evil, designed to prey on her compassion, on her love for me. The demand was not for a fight, but for our separation. It knew it could only hunt us if it could get one of us alone. Stay together and be trapped, or separate and be consumed. I shook my head, my eyes pleading with her to believe what she could see, not what she could hear. She stared at me, then back at the wall, listening to the sound of my own voice, begging her to come outside to her death. We were prisoners in this cabin, besieged by the ghosts of our own voices, and we knew, with a chilling certainty, that we would not survive another night. The sound of my own voice, twisted into a pained, desperate plea, finally faded away into the suffocating silence of the forest. We stayed frozen, listening. For what felt like an eternity, the attack was over, for now, but the psychological toll was immense. The entity had shown us its full capability. It could use not just our voices, but our love and concern for each other as weapons. We were trapped. The cabin was our tomb. We couldn't trust what we heard, so we couldn't respond to a real call for help if it ever came. We couldn't go outside, where the mimic was patiently waiting. We couldn't call for help, as we had no service. All we could do was sit here in the dark and wait for it to get bored of these games and simply tear its way through the thin wooden walls. Hiding was a losing strategy. It was just a way to delay the inevitable. As Chloe huddled in the corner, her face buried in her hands, a different part of my mind began to take over. The terrified, primal part was still screaming, but the scientist, the analyst, was desperately searching for a variable, a flaw in the system, a way to fight back. I started reviewing the facts, not as a victim, but as a biologist studying a predator. Fact 1. The entity's primary weapon is sound. It uses complex, mimicked audio to lure, to terrorize, and to psychologically break its prey. Fact 2. It requires a specific environment to hunt effectively. It silenced the entire forest. It needs to control the acoustic landscape, to be the only thing making a sound. Fact 3. It is intelligent. It learns, it adapts, it composes. It is not a mindless beast. And as I processed these facts, a desperate, insane, and beautifully logical idea began to form in my mind. This was the beginning of our confrontation, our desperate, primal struggle to survive. If a creature's entire existence, its entire method of hunting, is based on the precise control of sound, then perhaps its greatest weakness is the loss of that control. What if we could fight sound with sound? I looked over at Chloe, my eyes wild with a new, terrifying hope. "Chloe," I whispered, and she looked up, her face streaked with tears. "It controls everything we hear," I said, my voice low and urgent. "It creates the silence, and then it fills that silence with its lures. What if we take the silence away from it? What if we create a sound it can't mimic, a sound so loud and so chaotic it can't think, can't hunt?" She stared at me, her expression shifting from despair to a dawning, fragile hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, we weren't just hiding. We had a plan. It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was a plan nonetheless. My gaze drifted over to the corner of the room, where my scientific equipment sat silent. The tools I had brought here to observe and record were about to become our only weapons. A fragile, desperate hope was a better weapon than none at all. We moved with a quiet, focused intensity, our shared terror now channeled into a single purpose. While I frantically worked at my laptop, Chloe reinforced the cabin's weak points, dragging the heavy sofa to block the back window and stuffing spare blankets into the gaps around the doorframe. My hands flew across the keyboard. My equipment, my mundane tools of scientific observation, were about to be repurposed for a primal struggle. I bypassed my recordings of birdsongs and went deep into my system's diagnostic files. I was looking for a sound that was the complete opposite of a beautiful organic melody. I found it, a raw audio file of pure, multi-layered white noise, a dense and chaotic static used to test the absolute limits of a speaker's frequency range. It was the acoustic equivalent of a brick wall. "Cover your ears," I said to Chloe, my voice tight. "When I hit this, it's going to be loud. Louder than anything you've ever heard." She nodded, her face pale but determined, and pressed her hands tightly against the sides of her head. I plugged my laptop into the powerful portable speaker I used for field playback, a speaker designed to project sound clearly across hundreds of yards of open forest. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the mouse. Outside, the forest was still dead silent, a predator waiting patiently. I hit play. The sound that erupted in the small cabin was not just a noise. It was a physical force. It was a deafening, crushing wall of pure static, a chaotic roar that rattled the windows in their frames and vibrated through the floorboards into the soles of our feet. It was the sound of a waterfall, a hurricane, a million angry voices screaming at once with no words. We were using our mundane, everyday objects to fight back. And through the overwhelming roar of our own weapon, we heard a new sound from outside. It was a shriek. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a discordant, multi-layered scream of confusion and pain. It was the sound of the entity, its control shattered, its perfect acoustic world torn apart by our chaotic noise. In its scream, I could hear all of its stolen voices, the birds, the crying child, the woman calling for help, even the ghostly echoes of our own words, all crying out at once, a symphony of torment. The shriek grew more distant, a sound of pained retreat. The entity was fleeing from the noise, from the one thing in its world it could not mimic, could not understand, and could not control. The static continued to roar from the speaker. I looked at Chloe, my ears ringing, and she looked at me. Our desperate gamble had worked. The monster was in retreat. This was our chance. The agonizing, multi-layered shriek of the entity faded into the distance, swallowed by the roaring wall of static that filled our small cabin. We stood there for a moment, hearts pounding, ears ringing, enveloped in the chaotic noise of our own making. I didn't know if the creature was gone for good, or if it was just stunned, hurt, regrouping in the darkness. And I wasn't going to wait to find out. Now, I yelled to Chloe over the deafening roar, grabbing her hand. "We have to go now!" There was no time to pack. I looked at my expensive recording equipment, my laptop containing years of research, my entire professional life laid out on that small wooden table, and I let it go. It was just dead weight now. I grabbed our car keys from the hook by the door and pulled Chloe with me. I hit the spacebar on the laptop, and the roaring static cut off instantly. The sudden, profound silence that rushed in was a shock to the system, almost as violent as the noise it replaced. It was the enemy's silence, a dead, empty quiet that felt heavy with menace. We scrambled to move the heavy sofa from the back window and pull the table away from the door. Every scrape of the furniture on the wooden floor sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. My hands fumbled with the old iron latch. With a final groaning creak, the door swung open, revealing the cold, dark, and utterly silent forest outside. We burst out of the cabin and didn't look back. We ran. We plunged into the darkness, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. The forest that had once been a place of wonder and then of terror was now just an obstacle, a maze of black trees we had to navigate to survive. This was the beginning of our escape, a desperate flight, fueled by the hope that our gambit had bought us enough time. Every rustle of leaves behind us sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a predator. The entity's song was gone, but the feeling of being hunted was more intense than ever. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead, stumbling through the dark and silent forest with a single shared thought: escape. We didn't dare look back. We just ran toward the faint memory of the trail that would lead us back to our car, our one and only link to the real world. When we finally burst out of the tree line and saw the moonlight glinting off the windshield of our SUV, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and the sound of the doors unlocking was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. We threw ourselves inside, and I didn't waste a second. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning gravel as I turned the car around and sped away down the dark, lonely road. We drove for miles, in a stunned, breathless silence, the dark, menacing shapes of the trees flying past us in the headlights. As we put more distance between ourselves and the cabin, I felt the tight knot of terror in my chest begin to loosen, just slightly. We had made it. We had survived. And then, as the first pale light of dawn began to illuminate the eastern sky, the birds began to sing. It was the normal dawn chorus, the beautiful natural symphony that I had so eagerly anticipated just 2 days before. A single, clear, flute-like note from a wood thrush cut through the morning air. And we both flinched as if we'd been shot. Chloe let out a small, strangled cry and covered her ears. My own heart seized, and a jolt of pure Pavlovian terror shot through me. The sound that had been the passion of my life, the sound we had both considered to be the most beautiful on earth, was now an unbearable source of fear. The entity had done more than just hunt us. It had poisoned the very thing we loved. It had turned my science and her art into a permanent, psychological scar. We had escaped, but we were not whole. We had survived the night, but we had paid a terrible price. We had lost our sanctuary, our passion, our ability to ever again find peace in the wild places of the world. As we drove on, leaving the forest behind, the beautiful, innocent songs of the waking birds sounded like nothing but a mocking, terrifying echo of the monster we had left behind. The psychological wounds would never heal. Months later, we were trying to live a normal life, a phrase I now understood to be a profound and complicated lie. We had moved. We left our small university town with its quiet, tree-lined streets and found a small apartment in the heart of a loud, gray, and thankfully very noisy city. We surrounded ourselves with the sounds of humanity, the constant roar of traffic, the wail of distant sirens, the chatter of neighbors through thin walls. We were trying to build a fortress of noise to keep the memory of the forest's terrible, listening silence at bay. The evil is never truly vanquished. It only retreats, waiting. We had tried to rebuild our lives on this principle. I abandoned my PhD. I couldn't do it anymore. My expensive recording equipment, my life's work, was still sitting in that silent cabin, and I had no desire to ever get it back. I took a mundane job doing data entry, a quiet, monotonous existence in a cubicle, as far away from the natural world as I could get. Chloe's art supplies remained packed away in a box in the back of the closet. She never sketched again. The woman who could find beauty in the curve of a dead leaf now flinched at the sound of a bird outside our window. The trauma had left its mark on us, a quiet, shared wound that we never spoke of, but that was always present. We were closer than ever, but our bond was no longer forged in shared joy and passion. It was forged in a shared, sleepless terror. On the surface, we were fine. We went to work. We cooked dinner. We tried to pretend that we were the same two people who had driven into the mountains that spring. But it was all a fragile performance. Sometimes, a beautiful sound, a snatch of music from a passing car, the clear, high notes of a wind chime would make us both freeze, our eyes meeting across the room in a moment of shared, silent panic before the feeling passed. We were living in the aftermath, trying to convince ourselves that we had escaped. I had almost allowed myself to believe that we were safe, that the walls of our apartment, the noise of the city, and the sheer comforting mundanity of our new lives had built a fortress strong enough to keep the memories at bay. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday night. It was raining outside, the sound a gentle drumming against our window pane. I was sitting on the sofa, trying to read a book, and Chloe was in our small kitchen, cooking dinner. The sounds were normal, comforting. The sizzle of vegetables in a hot pan, the clink of a knife on a cutting board. And then she started to hum. It was a quiet, absent-minded sound, the kind of tune someone hums when they are content. I smiled to myself. It had been a long time since I had heard her hum. But then I started to actually listen to the melody. It was complex, full of strange intervals and cascading notes. It was hauntingly familiar. My fingers went numb, and the book I was holding slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. The sounds of the kitchen, the rain, the city outside, they all faded away, replaced by the memory of a cold, silent forest. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. I walked to the doorway of the kitchen. She was standing at the stove, gently stirring the contents of the pan, a small, peaceful smile on her face, and she was humming the song, the impossible, beautiful, and utterly monstrous song of the entity from the woods. My voice was a choked, terrified whisper. "Chloe, what is that? What are you humming?" She turned to look at me, her smile genuine and warm, completely unaware of the horror that was washing over my face. "I don't know," she said, shrugging lightly. "It's strange. It just popped into my head a few minutes ago. It's pretty, isn't it?" And in that moment, I understood the true nature of our escape. We had run from the cabin, we had fled the forest, but we had not escaped the song. A part of it, an echo, a seed of its impossible melody, had come back with us, planted deep in her memory, just waiting for a quiet moment to bloom. The haunting had followed us home. I stared at the woman I loved, and for the first time, I was truly, completely, and hopelessly afraid. The monster wasn't in the woods anymore. It was in the room with us. I burned the list, but I can't burn the words. Some rules aren't written on paper. They're written on you. I'm putting this recording out there, I don't know why, as a warning, I guess, so that maybe someone else won't make the same mistake. The world is full of forgotten places and rules that don't make sense. If you've ever seen something like this, a strange warning, a list, please leave a comment below. I need to know if I'm the only one. If you believe me, if you understand what I went through tonight, press the like button, just so I know someone is listening. And subscribe. Maybe if you follow what happens to me, you'll see the signs before it's too late for you. Don't be curious. Don't be like me. Just listen to the warnings. I burned the list, but I can't burn the words. Some rules aren't written on paper. They're written on you. I'm putting this recording out there. I don't know why. As a warning, I guess, so that maybe someone else won't make the same mistake. The world is full of forgotten places and rules that don't make sense. If you've ever seen something like this, a strange warning, a list, please leave a comment below. I need to know if I'm the only one. If you believe me, if you understand what I went through tonight, press the like button, just so I know someone is listening, and subscribe. Maybe if you follow what happens to me, you'll see the signs before it's too late for you. Don't be curious. Don't be like me. Just listen to the warnings.